Showtime! The Capital G Show starts right now.
What's up YouTube, Capital G here. So guys, I am doing another episode of How Come No One Plays This Shit, and today I'm talking about Herald of Perfection, more specifically the Happy Herald variant of the deck. If you're like me, you know, when I saw the ban list, of course, I was amazed by the whole Sandgam being banned, and I was enthralled by all the wind-up hits and stuff like that. But then I took a step back and I noticed a couple of the minor changes, and I was like, huh, that's kind of interesting. Advanced Ritual Art goes to 2. You know, Herald of Perfection has kind of always struck me as a deck that's wildly under the radar and has had a lot of potential. So I was like, well, the deck gets a little more consistent. And then I also started looking at some of the other changes on the ban list that kind of indirectly helped the Herald of Perfection deck. You know, Raioh got semi-limited, so, you know, at least you won't have to face down the turn 1 Raioh, you know, all the time. Solemn Warning got limited too, so, you know, there's less of a chance of your Advanced Ritual Art getting warninged. So I was like, wow, you know, my deck got more consistent, and some of the big counters to my deck got, you know, less consistent. I'm like, I kind of like where this thing's going. You know, I've always said on this channel that I love when a deck can do a broke play going first. I love that. If you can wind up loop your opponent's hand, good for you. If you can shock lock them or you can go Logi at set 5, I think that just elevates your deck's game. And, you know, I'm not really sure that a deck has a better broke turn 1 play than this deck. You know what I mean? And everybody knows what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Herald of Perfection plus Kristya. I mean, how the hell does your opponent counter that? You know, you could potentially negate spells, traps, monster effects. Your opponent cannot special summon any monsters, and you have a 2800 beater that just it got you a +1 because when you summoned it, it got you another fairy. So it's like, basically what you have now constructed is easily, without a doubt, one of the best overwhelming counter control fields that you can ever amass in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! I feel like a lot of people forget about Herald's 2800 ass. I mean, just in case you don't open with the Kristya Herald play, which is just godlike, I mean, you can sit with Herald in defense knowing that against pretty much anything your opponent throws at you, you're going to be safe. I mean, you know, you've got Acid Golem, BLS, JD, Heraldic Sun Dragon, but, you know, I would all consider those theme cards for the most part, except maybe Acid Golem, because, I mean, no one really plays that anymore. It loses more games than it wins a lot of times. So, you know, most of these decks out there, they don't really have many beaters that can get over this guy. You know, I love the fact that once Herald is on the field against basically any deck in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, you now control the pace of the game. If you want your opponent to be able to use cards, I mean, you basically dictate that. Now, the pace that the game is played at when it comes to Herald is almost always slow. It's kind of like the opposite of Karakuri, where they always want to play fast. You know, Herald always wants to play slow, so that can kind of be a bummer. But, you know, the fact that you control what happens, and decks like Mermail that want to play fast are completely slowed down, I like that. I like the fact that I now have sole control over the game. You look at decks like Mermail, Wind Up, and Fire Fist, and I mean, they're pretty much at your mercy. You know, all you have to do is play smart, only negate their destruction effects like Heavy Infantry and Bear, and it's like, they don't even run any cards in their extra decks that have 29 or up. So it's like, what are you going to put on the board that's going to kill my Herald? Because eventually I'm going to get Kristya on the field. Once I get that, I mean, it's pretty much GG. Now, one of the biggest problems that the deck inherently have was actually solved by the way of the Xyz summon. You know, it used to be that the only way you could really get a beater, you know, to actually do some damage was pretty much Kristya, or you had to like have Honest or something like that. But now, if you've got those extra manjus or sanjus and shit, you can just Xyz summon into rank 4s. I mean, do you know how ridiculously good it is to have a Utopia plus Herald? I mean, that's really good because now your Herald can start attacking, and you don't have to worry about, oh, my opponent, you know, summoned a Raioh and attacked my Herald and I didn't have Honest. So I feel like one of the biggest problems with the deck was actually just inherently solved by Xyz summoning. You know, the deck can now just make rank 4s and put in for some real damage. So, as you guys have probably guessed by now, I am a fan of this deck, but do not let the namesake fool you. Happy Herald is far from a perfect deck, and it is not flawless. Much like even the great Mermail Atlanteans, currently the best deck of the format, Macrocosmos and Dimensional Fissure will fuck up your entire day. First off, you can't use Herald of Perfection's effect, which means you lose all that tempo control, you lose all that blanket protection that it offers. You can't use Honest, and if your opponent gets the D-Fissure or Macro on the field before you get the Herald, oh my goodness, it just gets worse. Your Kristya drops are not going to happen. Your mass factories are going to be dead. Your Pot of Avarice is not live. I mean, this pretty much goes without saying that the macro rabbit matchup is an absolute nightmare, because on one side you have Logia, which can make things pretty problematic, and then on the other side, you've got Macrocosmos, which I just mentioned really hurt your deck. You know, while Thunder King Raioh is semi-limited and most people are now reserving spots for it in the side deck, it really just kills this deck. If your opponent can put that on the board turn one, you know, you can't use your manjus, you can't use your sanjus, you can't use Preparation of Rites. So, I mean, pretty much the only way that you're going to be able to get Herald of Perfection on the field is pretty much the old-fashioned way of drawing it. And I do understand, you know, you have multiple copies of the card in your deck and multiple copies of Advanced Ritual Art, but it sucks to be playing at such a slow pace when your deck is already inherently slow. And your 1400 beaters are just not going to do anything to a 1900 Raioh who's cutting off their effects. And also, for anybody out there who's ever played Agents, I don't have to tell you guys how much of a pain in the ass it is whenever you draw those freaking normal fairies. I mean, if you open with hands of like Happy Lover and Mystic Shine Ball, I mean, it freaking sucks monkey balls. But one of the biggest problems, maybe the biggest problem with this deck, is it has a similar tendency like Dark World to have some major consistency problems games 2 and 3. And I say that because there's only so much that you can side out before you really start messing with the consistency of the deck. I mean, let's say you're anticipating your opponent siding in D-Fissure or Macrocosmos, so you side deck in Mystical Space Typhoons. And it's like, okay, but you know, those are great, but if I happen to get my Herald first turn, then the MSTs really aren't as important as my normal fairies are. You know what I mean? So you always kind of have to walk this really tight tightrope to make sure that you don't mess up the consistency of your deck, because if you have all these backrow hate cards, but then your opponent has, you know, Dark Holes and Smashing Grounds, it's like, those aren't going to do anything if your Herald of Perfection is sitting in the graveyard dead, and then you just lose the game. So, you know, I think that Herald has always been a deck that can maybe be around tier 2 or something like that. I've never understood why nobody wants to play the deck. I mean, like I said, the deck has just gotten more consistent right now. You know, the Vers aren't currently out, so I mean, they haven't been out for this format. Obviously, the Vers hurt the deck, but you know, I feel like the deck got more consistent. I felt like a lot of the things that hate on the deck got less consistent. So it's like, what's the problem here? So let me know what you guys think. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you later. Subscribing makes life happy.